Far north, beyond the reach of highways and cell signals, where the vast forests of northern Canada give way to endless frozen plains, people sometimes vanish without explanation. Not the kind of missing persons case you see in urban areas with leads, witnesses, or closure. Here, in this unforgiving expanse, entire groups can step off the map forever. On a crisp morning in late August 1991, a group of 3 adults and 2 teenagers set out from their campsite near the edge of a remote provincial park in the Yukon Territory. They were experienced outdoors enthusiasts from Whitehorse, on what was meant to be a short 4-day backpacking loop along marked trails. They had permits, satellite maps, and enough supplies for a week. Nothing suggested trouble. Park wardens received a routine check-in call from the group's leader the evening before. Everything was fine, clear weather, good spirits, plans to summit a low ridge at dawn for views of the distant peaks. Then, silenced by the second missed check-in, a search was launched. The first team reached the campsite by midday on the 3rd day. The tents stood untouched, zippers half open, as if everyone had stepped out for a quick look around. Inside, sleeping bags neatly rolled, a half-eaten breakfast of rehydrated eggs still in the pot, backpacks with wallets, keys, and emergency beacons all accounted for. 3 pairs of hiking boots and 2 smaller ones lined up neatly outside the largest tent. Laces untied. No signs of animals, no torn fabric, no blood. Just an eerie stillness. About 15 meters from the tents, searchers found something odd. A near-perfect ring formed by 29 small boulders, each roughly the size of a softball, placed with almost mechanical spacing on the mossy ground. The nearest source of similar stones was a rocky outcrop over 200 meters away. No drag marks, no footprints around the circle itself. Inside the ring, 5 sets of barefoot impressions pressed deeply into the soft earth, all facing the same direction, due north. The prints showed weight evenly distributed, as if the group had stood shoulder to shoulder for some time before moving. From the circle, a single line of barefoot tracks headed north in a dead straight path, no meandering, no pauses to rest or adjust course. 5 people walking side by side, step for step, across uneven terrain that included sharp shale, low scrub, and shallow creeks. The prints never wavered, even when crossing a knee-deep stream whose water hovered near freezing. No parent or guardian would normally lead kids barefoot through that without hesitation. Yet the tracks showed no detour, no lifted steps indicating pain. The search team followed the trail for nearly 3 kilometers. It remained unnervingly linear, cutting through patches of thorns and loose gravel without deviation. Experienced trackers noted it felt almost robotic. People in distress usually zigzag, backtrack, or seek easier ground. Here, there was none of that. Then, at the 4-kilometer mark, the tracks divided cleanly. The 3 adult prints continued north in perfect alignment. The 2 teenage sets veered sharply west at nearly 90 degrees, without any sign of struggle or hesitation at the split point. No scuff marks, no turned footprints suggesting argument or goodbye, just a calm divergence. As if prearranged, the team divided. One group pursued the adults' trail, which climbed steadily into steeper, rockier ground. The prints stayed even and deep, defying the loose scree that should have caused slips or stumbles. After another 6 kilometers, the trail stopped abruptly in a flat patch of lichen-covered soil. The final left and right footprints of the lead adult were imprinted clearly, mid-stride, then nothing. No jump marks, no circling, no secondary tracks. The surrounding area, searched in widening circles for hundreds of meters, yielded 0 continuation. Meanwhile, the team tracking the teenagers found a more varied pattern. Steps grew shorter, some showed slips on wet rocks, a few places had handprints where someone steadied themselves. After 9 grueling kilometers, a helicopter spotted 2 figures huddled beneath a cluster of stunted pines. The teens were located just before dusk, cold, exhausted, feet raw and bandaged by their own torn shirt strips, but alive. They sat silently, backs to the wind, staring ahead without focus. On the inner wrists of both were identical sets of small circular marks, 4 pale rings in a square pattern, edges sharply defined, slightly raised like faint burns. Medical teams later examined them. No chemicals, no plant toxins, no matching injury from known sources. The marks faded slowly over weeks but left faint scars. The teens spoke little at first. They recalled eating dinner, crawling into tents then. Nothing until waking under the trees with searchlights around them. No memory of leaving camp, the circle, the walk, or separating from the adults. Fragments surfaced later in therapy flashes of bright haze, low whispers like wind through wires, a sense of being guided, but nothing coherent. The rescue operation quickly escalated. By the afternoon of the 3rd day, more than 30 personnel were in the field. Provincial park wardens, Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers, volunteer search and rescue teams from nearby communities, and 2 helicopters equipped with thermal cameras. Search dogs were brought in and given the scent from clothing left at the campsite. At the point where the adult tracks ended, the dogs circled once, sniffed intently, then sat down and whined. No trail forward, no scent lift, nothing to follow. It was as if the 3 adults had simply dissolved into the landscape. Ground teams expanded the search grid outward in concentric circles, covering more than 80 square kilometers over the next 10 days. Drones with infrared were deployed at dawn and dusk when temperature contrasts were sharpest. Divers checked the deeper sections of nearby creeks and small lakes within a reasonable radius. Nothing surfaced, no clothing, no gear, no human remains. Weather turned against them by the end of the first week. Heavy frost at night, sudden snow squalls that blanketed the higher elevations. Tracks from earlier days were partially obscured, but the original Barefoot line remained visible long enough for detailed plaster casts and photographs. Forensic analysts later confirmed the prints showed no signs of dragging or carrying. The adults had walked under their own power until the very last step. The 2 teenagers were airlifted to Whitehorse General Hospital within hours of discovery. Doctors treated severe frostnip on their toes, multiple blisters that had burst and refrozen, and moderate dehydration. Surprisingly, considering the distance and conditions, there were no broken bones, no hypothermia beyond mild stages, and no evidence of prolonged exposure that would suggest they'd been outside for more than 36 hours. Their physical resilience puzzled the medical team. The circular marks on their wrists drew the most attention. Each teen had 4 identical pale rings, arranged in a tight square roughly 3 centimeters on each side. Dermatologists documented the lesions as geometric erythema of unknown etiology. The borders were razor-sharp, with no inflammation spreading beyond the perfect outlines. Biopsies revealed only minor capillary dilation and slight cellular swelling consistent with brief, intense pressure or heat, but no chemical residue. No cellular destruction typical of burns, and no puncture wounds. One specialist noted in the chart, the symmetry and lack of natural irregularity rule out environmental causes. These appear applied by an object of precise manufacture. Yet no such device is known to produce this exact pattern without deeper tissue damage. Psychologically, the teens presented what clinicians called profound retrograde dissociative amnesia. They could recount their lives up to bedtime on the last evening at camp in vivid detail, the jokes around the fire, the taste of instant coffee, the sound of wind in the pines, but the next 36 hours were a blank wall. Under gentle questioning. Then later mild sedation and guided imagery sessions, only fleeting. Dreamlike impressions emerged, a sensation of floating lightness, distant metallic humming, hands that felt neither warm nor cold pressing against their skin, and a bright, diffuse glow that made everything else fade. When pressed about the adults, both would go quiet, eyes glazing, and repeat variations of, "They went ahead. We stayed behind. That's all." No amount of therapy over the following years recovered more. By their late teens, both had moved to southern Canada, pursued quiet careers, and steadfastly refused to discuss the incident publicly. They never returned to wilderness areas larger than a city park. Officially, the Yukon Territorial Coroner's Report, released the following spring, classified the 3 adults as missing and presumed deceased due to misadventure in remote terrain. The circle of stones was described as an anomalous feature of undetermined origin and purpose. The straight-line barefoot tracks, the precise divergence, the abrupt cessation of the adult trail, and the wrist marks were listed as unexplained elements inconsistent with typical wilderness disappearance patterns. The case file remains open. Though active investigation ceased after 18 months, this incident did not stand alone. Nearly 4 years later, on a foggy morning in early September 1995, a single-engine beaver floatplane carrying 2 wildlife biologists disappeared while conducting a low-level survey over the same broad northern plateau region. Roughly 160 kilometers northeast of the earlier campsite, Dr. Elena Moreau, 41, and her assistant Marcus Hawley, 29, were tracking caribou migration patterns as part of a long-term ecological study. They departed from a remote lake base at 7:45 a.m., filed a routine flight plan with expected return by 3 p.m., and made their final position report at 11:20 a.m., everything normal. Visibility 5 miles, light winds. No mechanical issues. When they failed to return, an immediate search was mounted. Floatplanes, helicopters, and ground teams scoured the planned survey grid. No emergency beacon activated. No wreckage was sighted from the air. After 3 weeks, with autumn storms closing in, the operation was scaled back. The biologists were listed as missing, presumed lost to an accident in unforgiving country. Then, in late July 1997 almost, 22 months later, a solo backcountry skier traversing a high alpine valley, far off any established route, came across the unmistakable shape of a de Havilland beaver resting upright on a narrow gravel bar beside a glacial stream. The aircraft was largely intact, floats still attached, wings level, propeller undamaged, cockpit windows unbroken. It sat in a place no floatplane pilot would ever attempt to land too short, too uneven, flanked by sheer rock faces and boulder fields. The nearest body of water, deep enough for takeoff or landing, was more than 3 kilometers. Downstream dot inside the cabin, both front seats empty. Flight bags, notebooks, sample kits, and survival gear neatly stowed. On the instrument panel, several gauges were cracked from inward blows. Dried blood smears later, DNA matched to Dr. Moreau stained the edges of the shattered glass. No sign of struggle outside the aircraft. No footprints leading away. Searchers combed the valley for days. Nothing. The aircraft had been reported missing in one drainage system. It was found more than 190 kilometers northwest, in terrain that would have required crossing multiple high passes and valleys, against the recorded wind patterns and fuel range. How it arrived there intact, upright, and abandoned defies conventional explanation. Both cases, separated by years and distance, share threads that linger in the quiet conversations of those who work these northern wilds. People walking away from safety barefoot in perfect formation. Trails that end mid-step, aircraft placed impossibly in unsuitable terrain, and a persistent silence from those few who return. These incidents, and others like them scattered across the vast northern wilderness, have quietly accumulated in the files of park services, territorial police, and aviation authorities. They rarely make headlines beyond local papers or niche forums where pilots, rangers, and backcountry hikers swap stories over coffee or satellite messengers. The official line is almost always the same: exposure, navigational error, sudden weather change, animal encounter. or simple bad luck in a place where help is hours or days away, even if you can call for it. Yet when you place the cases side by side, patterns emerge that don't fit neatly into any of those boxes. The Barefoot departures in straight, unerring lines. The geometric marks that appear on the skin of the few who return, precise enough to suggest deliberate application, yet leaving no identifiable trace of how. The trails that terminate mid-stride with no sign of a fall, a struggle, or even a deliberate stop. Aircraft found upright and mostly intact in locations no rational pilot would choose. Sometimes hundreds of kilometers off course. With evidence of frantic activity inside the cockpit, but no occupants and no path of escape. No single explanation covers them all. Search and rescue veterans who've worked these regions for decades will tell you off the record that they've learned not to push too hard for answers. Some things the land simply keeps in the years since. Occasional reports surface from solo hikers, hunters, or survey crews working the same broad latitudes. A faint circle of stones spotted from a ridge, already half covered by lichen, as if it had been there for decades. Footprints in fresh snow that march perfectly straight for a kilometer, then vanish without a turn. A low, steady hum heard on windless nights that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. Most are dismissed as misperception, fatigue, or the tricks of isolation. A few are documented in private journals or whispered around campfires. Then left alone, the two teenagers from the 1991 incident, now in their 40s, live quietly in different cities. They do not speak of that August morning. They do not hike. They do not own camping gear. When family gatherings turn to old photos or travel stories, they change the subject with the same calm. Practiced deflection they've used for 35 years. The families of the 3 missing adults received death certificates after the statutory waiting period. There were small memorials, plaques at trailheads, donations to wilderness safety programs, but no graves. No closure. The Beaver floatplane from 1995 was recovered, craned out of the valley, and examined in a hangar in Whitehorse. No mechanical failure was found that could account for the deviation, the improbable landing, or the condition of the cockpit. The blood on the panel remained unexplained beyond the obvious. Someone struck the instruments repeatedly while still alive. Why, and what became of the 2 biologists afterward, stays unanswered. Today, the plateau region remains open, beautiful, and largely empty. Floatplanes still fly low over the caribou herds. Backpackers still plot multi-week routes through the passes. Rangers still conduct their patrols. Life continues. But in the quiet moments, when the wind drops and the light turns that peculiar golden hue before midnight sunsets, some who work or travel these lands admit they listen a little more carefully. They glance north more often than necessary. They double-check their boots before stepping away from camp, even for a minute, because the tundra remembers, and sometimes, very rarely, it chooses to give back 2 out of 5. With marks no doctor can name. With memories that refuse to surface. With a story that ends in the middle of a step. That's the end of this telling. Friends, if you've ever ventured deep into the northern wilds, whether the Yukon, the Northwest Territories, Alaska's interior, or anywhere the trees thin out and the sky feels too big, drop a comment below. Have you felt that strange pull on a still day? Seen something that didn't belong? Heard a sound that didn't fit? Or maybe you've just read enough of these accounts to make you think twice. Before straying too far off trail. Like if you want more stories pulled from the edges of the map, places where official reports use words like unexplained without apology. Subscribe if you're curious about what the wilderness keeps hidden when no one's watching. Stay safe out there. And always leave a note when you head into the quiet places. Until next time.